size we're now.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's of course dependent on that. If anyone has problems, but
Right.
it was a way to turn for receivers to tell that they wouldn't get video, but.
Yeah, that's fair. I think if people do want to have video on further presentations, that's fine. I will be running the slides during this time, though. Okay.
Yeah, at least if you have the client, you have on the view, you have show participant video. I think it might actually to the checkbox under that menu, so you can actually.
We're gonna wait a couple more minutes before getting officially started, just to let some people trickle in. We have about 30 people on the call right now. I believe Ian, are you here yet? On the list. So wait a couple minutes. In the meantime, I did add the Etherpad link to the WebEx chat. Please go and add your name there during this session. That is the replacement for the blue sheet.
Doesn't seem to be visible in the chat.
Yeah, I was also going to say that.
You don't see it in the WebEx chat?
Nope. Try reposting it.
I'll repost it right here.
That worked.
While we are waiting to start, we will need a note taker into Etherpad. Does anyone want to volunteer to help out with that?
Hi, Tommy, it's Tal. I can take notes, but usually Etherpad requires good connectivity, and I prefer to do it offline. I mean, not on Etherpad.
That is fine with me. Would you be able to copy them into the Etherpad once you have them complete? That'd be great.
Sure. Yep.
Thank you. So for now, we can just use the Etherpad for our blue sheet. Apologies there. All right, let's get started. Welcome all to IPPM. This is our virtual meeting to take the place for IETF 107. I am Tommy Pauly, and I am one of your ongoing co-chairs. We also have Ian Sweat as one of the new co-chairs, and Bill and Brian are outgoing. All right. And can I get confirmation that you guys can hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. All right. This is the Note Well. You should be familiar with it, but if you aren't, please do take some time to look at this. This covers the guidelines for participation in the IETF and the disclosures that you can make. Since this is a virtual meeting, and I think virtual interims are a bit of a new thing for this group, I just wanted to cover how we're going to run the meeting. So if you are here, you're on the WebEx, so you don't really need that link. We do have a Jabber room. For the blue sheets, we are using the Etherpad, which is what we've been doing for IETF 107 in general. If you have not yet, please do go to the Etherpad and add your name and affiliation there. For the, if you want to have a comment at the mic effectively, we are going to be using the WebEx chat. That's the chat in WebEx, not in the Jabber room. And if you would like to join the queue to have a comment, please type Q+ and send that to everyone. If you'd like to leave the queue, type Q-. And the chairs will be monitoring that. All right, so here's our agenda. We are first covering, as usual, our working group documents. We have a couple status updates from the chairs. We have changing in chairing as well as in our area directors. We're going to go through our working group documents from Al, Greg, and Frank. And then we have various other work that has received discussion on the list or we've talked about in previous meetings. And so the last half hour will be spent covering those topics. All right, so for chairing, we do have a change in chairs, and so I'd like to give a big thank you to both Brian and Bill, who will be leaving us as IPPM chairs for all of the time and effort that they've put into this group. I think they've both been chairing since 2012 and have done a great job there. I think I was looking, we've had like 18 RFCs published in that time, so just want to thank them so much for that. And
thank you all for being a great working group.
And I will be continuing as chair, and Ian Sweat will be joining us. Ian, are you on the call yet? We also do have a change in area directors. Martin Duke is our responsible area director going forward. Martin, do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Hi, I'm Martin. Happy to be here. Spent a fair amount of the past week just kind of catching myself up on a lot of the issues in this working group. I'm excited to work with you.
Okay, on the document side, we have several different updates. Stamp was published as a RFC 8762. And we have the metric registry as well as the initial registry contents in the RFC editor queue, along with the multi-point alt mark document in the RFC editor queue. So we're making good progress. The main IOAM core document, the IOAM data draft, has gone through working group last call, and we have received an update based on that. We will be getting an updated presentation on that today. And I would specifically like to ask those who gave last call feedback to respond either during this meeting or on the list afterwards to indicate that the feedback that they had is addressed or not based on the current updates. And then lastly, the capacity metric method document and direct export for IOAM have been adopted, and we do have the working group drafts of those uploaded. All right. So with that, I think we're going to start with our first talk from Al. Al, are you here?
Yes, I am. Tommy, can you hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you great.
All right, great, thanks.
You want to
And-
advance slides?
Okay, I'll do that. Let me also add a thanks to Miria, who has worked with us for 4 years, getting our drafts through as AD advisor. It's been a pleasure. And so this draft is on the metrics for and methods for IP capacity measurement. We adopted it, as Tommy said. We've updated it also, as Tommy said, and Al and Rudiger and Len are the co-authors. Next slide, please. So 2 slides on quick overview. You can imagine a measurement that's going to take a certain amount of time, a fixed time here, interval length I, and we're making measurements very frequently and using those measurements to operate a search algorithm. And we're grouping the measurements in time intervals dt and length. We take the number of bits measured in those intervals and then look for the interval with the maximum number of bits. That's the measurement, IP layer capacity. And of course, we've defined that at the IP layer. Next slide. So here's some more detail about the metric and the equation. You know, there's lots of metrics that could be defined, but we're focusing on the maximum, as that's the one that's sort of easiest to pin down. And just a couple of changes. We changed how we work the indexes a little bit here, so that the n starts at 1, and that's now consistent across all the different definitions and the different standards bodies. Next slide, please. So here's our status. We've had many comments and reviews. I think we're getting very close to a complete draft, including new reviews from talking about this with ETSI STQ Mobile. That's a technical committee, and we've got new members of ITUT Study Group 12. All the testing companies that you've used in apps on your mobile phone, for example, and we've had testing from various volunteers. All of this has been a good input and fed back into the document. So the key updates in 01 are the measurement considerations and the reporting formats. Next slide, please. So now we get to the meat of this, and here's where I expect to get some discussion going. Hint, hint. So we have in section 8.3 on measurement considerations. It's not a new section, just the new material, where we're covering the cases where packet losses may occur independently from the sending rate. We sort of expected that you imagine that loss will occur certainly when you're at the capacity limit, but if there's some sort of background loss occurring, then these are the kinds of places where we might encounter that. The congestion at an interconnection backbone, that appears losses distributed over time. Random early detection, if that's being applied someplace, that could also be a cause. But a key observation that we've made is that when we see these background losses, there's typically only a small degree of delay variation. And we kind of expect that when we're actually hitting the congestion point, that there's going to be delay variation and loss. although delay variation, the way we've left this is that delay variation in the extreme is enough to indicate congestion. So also, if there's persistent competing traffic on the measurement paths, similar to the kind of thing that we measured when we were doing our Hackfest measurements, then that can cause random packet losses in the test stream. And let's see here. All the what is it? All the wrong one. All the buttons for WebEx are in my way of reading the bottom slide there. But it's possible to mitigate these conditions. But the first thing you should do is to try to locate the measurement points as close as possible to the to the links that you're testing, and try that first. So next slide. Hello.
Yep, I think I've moved to the next slide.
Okay, good. Thank you, Tommy. All right. And I should also mention, I've had pretty good performance today, but occasionally I get cut off. So if that happens, it'll take about a minute. Just wait for me. We have this search algorithm. It's described at a high level in section 8.1. We're now referencing the version that ITUT Study Group 12 constructed as well. And basically at a high level, here's how it works. I mean, we start out with status feedback reports coming from the receiver. Every 50 milliseconds is what the the prototype code uses. And when we look at the measurements and we see that the sequence or loss or order errors are 0 and the delay variation is less than a threshold, when we say yes to that, then we generally increase the sending rate. And we have the ability to increase that at a fast or a slow rate, depending upon whether we're close to the congestion point or not. When we've got some ambiguity about whether there's a possible indication of congestion, then we sort of put off the decision and we maintain the sending rate. So that's the orange path diagonally through the middle. And then when we've got a definite indication of congestion, where we've seen errors, losses, delay variation above the upper threshold, then we reduce the sending rate, and we have the ability to do that fast or slow. Now, one of the ways that we can mitigate the case where packet losses occur independently from the sending rate is to adjust the parameters of the search algorithm. And so I'm illustrating that a little bit here too, where we can, just by adjusting the parameters, we can take away the slow increase, always make that fast, and we can take away the fast reduced sending rate, and I've marked those off by stars there. So that's the way that in general how that would work. And I know this is really high level, but it's the level at which we probably want to explain it here today. Let's go to the next slide. So another point that's been discussed, all throughout last year and this year too, is this turbo mode concept, which turned up in Matt Mathis's testing. He reported it on the mailing list, and at that time we decided that we would report the separate results for the repeatable modes. And you can sort of see that stylized indicated here, where the first few seconds of a new flow experiences a higher capacity, and then the subsequent seconds, sort of the sustained capacity, would be at a lower level. There's a rationale for this that comes from loading web pages quickly or buffering up or increasing the buffers in streams as fast as possible. Those are all key metrics. But other modes may be encountered. The question really is, and the tell is whether they are similar to this, is are they repeatable modes? And so things like radio constellation changes when you're testing, the cellular modes, use of those as you're testing, weather events, things of those natures, they are either repeatable or they're not in time compared to the conditions that we set up for starting and finishing a test. And so those those may be the simple conditions that we have to characterize as they are instead of in separate reporting the results separately. But obviously, any additional information that you can gather about a test is useful to include. So next slide, please, Tommy. Okay, so we've identified some reporting format elements which we think ought to be included here, and that's that the singleton IP capacity results should be accompanied by the context under which they were measured. It's good to get the timestamps for each of the sub-intervals, each of the DTN, especially the one where the maximum takes place. Obviously, the source and destination IPs or other IDs, and the other what we're calling inner parameters, which are all the typical metric parameters. So we've got a list of those in section 4. Outer parameters or measurement context, such as performed in motion. That might be the kind of thing you write down when it's drive testing, or other factors belonging to the context. The result validity. Sometimes we know that the test terminated early because connectivity was lost. Things like that. So those are good to include. A field where unusual circumstances could be documented, and also a field to ignore or to mask out results in the aggregate processing once you understand what's taken place in each case. Okay, next slide. So here's the high-level standard status. I said I was going to put a slide in on this, and I did. In study group 12, we've approved the updated version of recommendation Y1540, what we often just call 1540. And annexes A and B contain the new metric, method of measurement, and most importantly, the sort of the best search algorithm is in Annex B. There's also considerable background there where we reported summaries of our test results, research on various academic literature. Rudiger Guide provided that, and that's distributed in appendices 10 through 13. ETSI-STQ has also approved the metric in their TS 103222 Part 2 document, and the approved links will take you right to a place where you can get the latest versions of these. Just to mention that. The ETSI documents on high-speed internet KPIs. It makes a strong reference to Y1540 for all the other material beyond the metric definition. In the broadband forum, the project to prepare this metric and method of measurement has been approved. And we've got a really good review going there for the last, the project was approved back in September. And we expect sort of a first ballot in May this year. And so making good progress with this version of it called Working Text 471. And of course we know what our status here is in IPPM. The internet draft is adopted, and we're trying to make it better. So we've got a good harmonization process going across the industry. Pretty rare, but I think in this particular case where there's lots of ad hoc testing going on in our world, that this is valuable. Next slide. So next steps. In the post working group adoption, we have the harmonization activity, trying to keep up with the parallel efforts and ensure IPPM's expertise is incorporated elsewhere. We're basically doing that through flesh and blood liaisons. Rudiger, Len, and myself are all working, in as many places as we can to keep things synchronized and up to date. But we're not trying to do some formal synchronization where there's a big bang and 4 standards get delivered. We'll sort of do it and do the best schedule we can everywhere, and do the round robin updates if we have to. We'd like to reach consensus soon here in IPPM so that we can start work on protocol support. I think that's one of the real roles of the IPPM in this overall tapestry of metric development and harmonization. So we'd like to get some additional volunteers for review, and if necessary, trigger more reviews with a working group last call. And I think, other than the references, I think that's my last slide, Tony.
Yep, sounds good. So if anyone has any questions or comments, please send a +Q to the WebEx chat. Otherwise, I would like to solicit if anyone does want to volunteer to review or has already read this, if you could please speak up. I think, yeah, we can definitely get this in the queue for doing last call, specifically with the intention of getting more comments and more reviews on this.
Very good, thanks.
All right, thank you. Seeing no one jump up, I think we can move on. Thank you, Alf.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.
All right, so next we have the stamp option LV.
Here, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, yep.
Okay,
Go ahead.
great. So Greg Mirsky here. I'm presenting on behalf of authors of this draft. And as you know, you heard that we have published the base specification, RFC 8762, and thanks everyone who helped us to move and reach this goal. But this is an extension to this work. So next slide, please. This is an update, and to capture what's been changed between our discussions is that we defined the stamp session identifier, introduce HMAC TLV for their identity protection, and based on the comments we received at the last meeting in Singapore, so we clarified their stamp processing and location TLV. So it was 1 octet for destination port, so we matched it with a header size of 2 octets for destination port and source port fields. And follow-up TLV, we proposed a new name for this field as a follow-up timestamp. So to make it more distinct and differentiate from timestamp, which is a field in a stamp-based packet. Next slide, please. Stamp session identifier with the extension to control their DSCP marking on the packets. And the idea is that DCP marking within a stamp session can change. So there is a question of what's a better way to identify the stamp session. And well, it was not part of the thinking when we were working on the base specification, but now we got to it. And what we propose is to add in the base packet the 2-octet field, which is a non-zero unsigned integer. And the value will be set by session sender and must not change during the course of what is perceived as stamps test session. And session reflector, stamp session reflector that supports this new specification must copy this value and put it into its field. So just to save time, space, we didn't copy their format of their session reflector packet, unauthenticated and authenticated. But you can look in the document, and so all formats are presented there. Okay, next slide. HMAC TLV. So, as you know, STEM has two modes, unauthenticated and authenticated. In authenticated mode, we use HMAC to do identity protection. And we follow the same approach with extensions by introducing HMAC TLV. And effectively, this is the same size. So the proposal is that nodes supporting this specification will use HMAC as a 256, and the digest will be truncated to 128 bits. The HMAC TLV must be used when the stamp is on authenticated mode, and it may be used if it's unauthenticated. And it protects only TLVs. So when HMAC is present, it protects only TLVs. It doesn't protect the stamp base packet. Okay, next slide, please. So for TLV processing, we try to improve or clarify how their TLVs should be processed. Some TLVs that have fixed size. So now we specify that the receiver of TLV must check the length, and if the length is not correct, then stop processing, and session reflector must send ICMP error message. It should be throttled, pointing to length field that caused the problem. Next slide, please. So we understand there are quite extensive updates, and we always welcome comments. We had very good discussion with Rakesh and appreciate his comments. And authors, we think that the document is ready for working group last call.
It looks like Rakesh is in the queue. Do you want to speak?
Thanks, Greg, for good discussions. I think with adding the session ID in query format there, we are now exhausting all the available bits. where we don't need to copy it from the query to responder. It just became RFC now, and at this point we have no more bits left without reflector has to copy it. So I don't know, we talked about it, and if it's possible to have session ID in a TLV, this way we could still have those bits if you want to extend it for some use cases that it just became RFC now. So
yeah, if we can go back to the slide, and thanks for the question. Yeah, one more. Yes. So as you see there, the format of session sender unauthenticated packet. So we do have 28 octets here if we want to extend their base packet. And if, yes, in this presentation, I didn't include, just to save space, session reflected unauthenticated packet, but it does have 3 octets that are not assigned there, must be 0. So yes, I understand their space is scarce, but there is still space. So
yeah, it's there. Thanks, Greg. It's there. It's just that the reflector has to copy it from one place to another place, right? Without you can just send it back as is. So that's one constraint.
true, but that's sort of how stamp operates, because the reflector copies the sequence number and timestamp information from the received packet already. If we look at the format of the packets, so their session reflector packet, again, first includes the information that reflector puts in, and then it carries the information that was received from the session sender.
Yeah, I think we are on the same page. I think we understand what is the behavior, and I just wanted to highlight that there is no bit left where it can come back without having to copy from query to responder. And if that's not be okay with that, that's fine.
Okay. No, actually, I will point that the 3 octets at the end of the packet, they are not used in session sender and not used in session reflector packet formats. So if we look for the space in a packet that is available in both packets, in session sender and session reflector unauthenticated packets, then we have 3 octets that are available in both, and they're in the same place.
If we can use that, we should clarify that there are 3 bytes which represent that this can be used by querier and responder. And okay, I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's in RFC, so we can take it offline. And again, I understand that now it's you need to imagine from their RFC 8762. But when we discussed where to put session identifier, we considered to use this space, but then we decided to keep it next to the error estimate, so basically to have fields more contiguous.
All right, thank you. I think we also have Martin Duke in the queue.
Martin Duke, thanks, Greg. What's the use case for this SSID? Is this if you have NATs in the path or something, or when would you really
yeah, one of the extensions that we have is to be able to control DHCP marking. So introducing the session ID just simplifies their session identification. So what we our thought was that it can be used in a combination with one of the 4 tuples, and 4 tuples being source IP, destination, and source and destination UDP ports. So it's a probably will simplify the operational procedure and simplify for the reflector, especially in STEM-based specification. Their notion of stateful and stateless STEM session reflector defined. So if it's stateful, it runs its own sequence number, so to allow measurement of one-way packet loss. And session identifier will simplify their implementation of STEM session reflector stateful.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Greg.
Okay, thank you.
Move on. Thank you so much. All right, so next we have a large chunk on IOAM. As a time check, we started a little bit late, so we're running 10-15 minutes behind. So we'll see how much we need for this topic, and if we need to, we may have to bump a couple things off the end of the agenda.
I can try to speak a little faster, but I'm not sure whether that's going to help. Thanks, Tommy. So this is a presentation between myself and Tel, who's going to go and flip to the next slide. I'm going to go cover 2 drafts, the first ones, so the data draft and the V6 options draft. And Tel's going to go and cover the flags draft and the direct export drafts. So Tommy, you already said that we went through, next slide, a working group last call on the IOM data draft. And that resolved in quite a few comments. So thanks to all reviewers for their detailed reviews. So much appreciated, because I believe that it really made the document much better and much stronger. So in order to go and deal with these comments in a relatively structured way, we created issues on Git, and we grouped these issues a little bit. And what I'll go do is in the next maybe 5 minutes, quickly skim through all the various updates that we've done. Obviously, well, we can't really discuss every single text change because there's quite a few, as you already see in the list of issues here. But I'll try to go and give you a glimpse of what happened. Maybe also to go and provide a little bit of an incentive to go back to the document and diff it to the 0.8 version and see whether you're happy with the updates. So let's flip to the next slide and go through the whole thing issue by issue. So 147, which also links to 158, 149, and which also links to 157, brought up by you, Greg, and Mickey. They brought up a bunch of editorial glitches that we have resolved. So one thing was there could be, so the document made reference that, well, if the remaining length drops to 0, then you can't insert anything more. But there could be a situation where the remaining length is less than what you can go and drop into, and it's still not 0. And so, well, good nuance, good catch. I think that's been clarified. There's a bunch of sloppy language. That's all thanks to Frank writing the initial document. So I said certain things like native IPv6, and Greg called those like there's no such thing as native IPv6 as v6, right? We had references to drafts that are expired by now, like Petter's draft, for instance. We got rid of those in order to clean those up because Petter stopped maintaining that one. And there's a couple of statements, and Mickey called those around price types, and we never ever stated explicitly that, well, we expect that the ordering of the data fields is following the order of the bits. Implicitly, that was already there, and all the examples were that way, but we never ever stated that explicitly. We do that by now. We have statements that transit nodes must not modify fields in the fixed header, and also that must be zero fields should be also then set to not only zero but also ignored by transit nodes. So I think all of these things are obvious, but it's very helpful to state the obvious. Greg brought up an issue about the term in situ, and IOM evolved from something that was clearly only in situ, i.e. piggybacking information on top of the packet. By now, we have other options where there might be pure IOM packets, like loopback, for instance. And well, for those, in situ wouldn't apply, but we obviously want to go and keep the term. So we said, well, it's an umbrella term instead of like it puts, well, focus on the specific functionality. So I think it's now the group name instead of, well, there is a specific function there. Next slide. So let's keep rolling to 151, which is again one from Greg. And that's again, I think probably to blame on me. Early on, we didn't really properly use 2119. And there's been statements with uppercase should that shouldn't have been uppercase should. And that's been clarified so that it should be possible. And obviously, you need to understand what would happen if the possibility is not met. Well, that wasn't really the case. I think we wanted to outline that is there is an option to go this way, but there is another option. So I think we wanted to go and outline options instead of steering people one particular direction. Next slide. 152 is on existing definitions. Again, clarifications. You could call them editorial or classifications. So what happens if the underlying protocol, and again, Greg, thanks for all the nitty-gritty reviews, really helpful. What if the underlying encapsulation protocol doesn't really carry anything like hop limit or TTL? Well, there is nothing. What would you put in? Well, we put FF in now, so we hadn't really that thing specified. We hadn't really specified, although the examples were there, what the field length is for trace type 0, which is 4 bytes. And we got rid of implicit definition of nomenclature, like IOM capable nodes. We never ever wanted to go and define that thing, and we are steering clear of that now. Let's flip to the next one and address 153, which is from Greg and Parag. There is a couple of fields, and we did that on purpose, as we all remember, that don't really carry a unit type. And that discussion was, well, intensely discussed in the design team as well, of what to go do with this. Should we have finally a conclusion that we want a unit type for these fields, given that it limits flexibility and it also creates a problem with certain implementations because not everybody would go and use the same unit necessarily. So what we were reverting back to is a suggestion without really a forcing function where we say, well, it's really beneficial if people moving forward would use bytes as a unit, but we're not forcing this for now because we know that implementations differ for now. Let's move on to 154. One from Greg and Parag again. There's been suggestions for additional data fields, and in the working group, we've seen many additional suggestions prior. And we felt that given that we're very, very close to the finish line, it's much better to finish this document off and then have additional documents that can make the case for additional data fields along with the use cases and explain that, as opposed to we're opening up lengthy discussions because we know that these discussions will be lengthy as we've seen them in the past. So we decided not to do anything about additions, functional additions to the document. So we are revising the document, we're making it crisper, we're not adding functionality at this stage anymore. Then there's been security-related questions, and Greg and I think Tal addressed most of those in section 8 around a bunch of additional security aspects. So I think the security section probably doubled by now in size from 08 to 09. So thanks, Tal, for all the additions. It's kind of what happens with nodes that maliciously change IOM data. It discusses the leaking debate that we had, like, especially with the 6-man people in detail. And there's been kind of also a forward reference to, if you're having specific questions about encapsulation related questions with IOEM, those need to be covered in the related encapsulation drafts because we can't really cover them in the data draft. Let's jump forward to cover 156. That's been one from Mickey, who brought that up and also provided the patch. Thanks, Mickey. So there was a question like, yeah, well, no timestamps a packet on ANCAP, but what is this timestamp representing? And there's multiple options what this timestamp could represent. And again, given that we didn't really want to go and constrain implementations, we said, well, what we really want to know is when the thing is going to go timestamp the packet, not that everybody timestamps the packet necessarily the same way. So the option that we've opted for finally, or that we went for, is to require that the implementation documents how it's going to go and when it's going to go timestamp the packet, acknowledging that there is multiple options. So I think a documentation request is there instead of mandating everybody behaving the same way, which is hard because there is too much variety out there in the chipsets and what they can go to. Let's flip to the next slide. 158 is again from Mickey. Almost an well, it's an editorial glitch. We in 7.4 and section 7.4, we forgot that, well, there is bits available for assignment, and that is something that we, well, addressed by now. Was missing. And then another editorial glitch that Mickey caught was there was references to direct export still in the draft. Direct export has its own draft by now. So we moved everything out, and also the few traces and remainders that were in there got caught by Mickey and been ironed out. And I think that brings me to the end of this lengthy list, and considering next steps for that particular document. So we had a lot of really good comments. I think we did a load of edits. Since then, well, after the working group last call finished, the whole thing went quiet. It could be an indication of there is no more comments. It could be an indication people were waiting for the 09 version to go and reread it. So my reading was on that, and we discussed that in the design team earlier on today, or well, last night for the people in the US, was that, well, we want to go and give everybody obviously a period of time to go and re-review. And if there is nothing major received, we might want to go and consider another working group last call by something that may. Tommy, do you want to go and take questions now, or should we go through the entire blob and then take everything in one go? Maybe I think we want to go and take questions now. Right?
Feedback on the changes that were made in the draft 09 update during working group last call, specifically the people who provided reviews. I see, of course, Greg did a lot of those, as well as Mickey. If you want to speak up at all now, with your thoughts of if you think that's addressed and what you think is required going forward to make sure we have good enough review before we send this on, that'd be great. But otherwise, we can move on. So yeah, Greg.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yes, as Frank mentioned, we had a discussion, reviewed the presentation last night, and I agree with the proposed timeline. So I need some time to review the updates because one of the reasons it's quite significant changes. So targeting working group last call on the data document somewhere in May sounds reasonable. Before that, I'll review it and I'll share my conclusions with the list after I review the latest version.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Feedback.
This is Mickey. I believe all my comments were addressed, and I agree with the proposals for moving forward.
All right, noted. Thank you. Looks like we don't have anyone else in the queue, so if we want to continue on the slides, that'd be great.
Then let's flip to the next slide. So this one is on V6 options. And the changes were dramatic. I needed to go and change Mickey's email address. And well, not me, Shweta did that and posted the update. And in addition, I have to go and send thanks to Tommy for kicking off the process for early allocation for 2 option types. So we're hoping to go and get those allocated so that I've seen Justin or his V6 implementation in the Linux kernel on the call earlier, so that we get those things into code as well, and that we, well, maybe at some point even end up with interoperable implementations and no divergence at that level. So I think that's good news. So thanks, Tommy, for kicking this off. And well, the updates were minor. So the real question is what we want to go and do from a document progression perspective. If you go to the next slide. We discussed this in the design team earlier on. I think there was more of a feeling that we want to go and sequence working group last calls rather than going in parallel. But maybe I think this is something that we want to go and address once we're done with the data draft.
That makes good sense to me.
Because I think we also need to go and have the co-review by 6 man, so it's going to be a lengthy exercise in any case. Right?
That's correct. As we saw earlier, we have other documents that look like they're getting ready for last call, so those may interleave.
You see how you and Q?
Yeah, I saw some comments on actually a month ago, we just submit another draft, which actually summarized several options to apply the IOM in IPv6 environments. The current, because we identify some practical issues for the current proposal, then, but there might be alternative ways to avoid that. So basically in that draft, we gave several possible options, and we should suggest everybody could read that draft and provide your comments. And I think the best one should be maybe picked from that list of options. So that's our suggestion.
Thank you. Frank, do we have anything more for this one, or should we move on to?
I think we can move on. Yeah. If there's nobody else in the queue, then I think you can go and hand the ball or whatever we want to go and call it here to Tal. Tal's going to go cover the next 2. Tal, are you here?
Thank you. And let's try to cover these next 2 within 10 minutes or less if we can.
Okay, sure, we can do that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we had a few meetings in the design team about the flags draft, and we revised the draft. And the current version has a few changes compared to the previous version based on feedback we received from people on the working group and based on feedback from the last IETF meeting. One thing that was discussed a couple of times in the IETF meeting and also in virtual meetings was security aspects and specifically amplification attacks. And we added more text to emphasize these attacks, to discuss when they are relevant, and also to suggest measures that can be taken to mitigate these attacks. One is to use rate limiting. The other is data minimization, which means you limit the number of data fields that are used when you use the loopback flag. And that's basically one measure that can significantly reduce the scope and the scale of an amplification attack. So hopefully we'll get some feedback about that we want to make sure that the changes we made address the concerns that were raised specifically about amplification attacks. Next, please. One open issue that we still want to hear some more feedback from the working group about is the loopback reverse path. The thing is that one of the points that were raised, and this is a good point, is that we do not want, when a packet is looped back using the loopback flag, we do not want IOM data to be incorporated into that packet when it's on the reverse path. So in order to avoid having IOM transit nodes push data fields into that packet that has the loopback on the reverse path, we need some way of indicating to these nodes that the packet is on the reverse path. So there are a few ways, a few possible ways to do that. One way is by using a new flag, and we're not very eager to do that, to define a new flag. Another way to go is to define a new IOM type, which would not consume another flag, so maybe more preferable. And finally, the third option is kind of a hack, but it may still work, which is basically the node that loops back the packet and clear the remaining length field. And that way, again, transit nodes on the way back will not add any data fields. So this is an open issue. And again, we're looking for feedback from people just to get a feeling of how people think this should be addressed. This is the final slide about the flag draft. So this was an open issue, and hopefully once we resolve this open issue, it will be ready for working group last call. But at this point, we want to still hear some more feedback about this.
Frank, I think you're first in the queue.
Yeah, it was just, well, it was mostly putting the question directly to Brian Trammell, because I think you were pretty vocal about the packet amplification problem that loopback could go and create. So do you have any thoughts or a preference for the approaches that Tal was mentioning, or any guidance for us?
So I quickly had a look at this for the meeting as well, and this downgrades it from a I can see how this is an amplification attack to this smells like an amplification attack, right? So that's good, right? Like, so it's gone from ooh, scary to I have an uneasy feeling about this. I'd have to dig into it a bit more. Like I'd have to see a more detailed design to actually be able to analyze it. There's two things that you're looking to prevent here, and so clearing a remaining length field or adding a new flag basically solves one of those cases where you have all of the devices on the path are trustworthy with respect to this feature. I'd have to think a little bit more about the threat model here, and I can try and spend some time on that, not right in the middle of the meeting. But if the threat model includes that there might be devices that can actually touch those flags and not be well-intentioned about it, then you still have to be careful with this. So this is definitely better in that I can't like point at it and go, ooh, reflection. But I can't point at it and go, ooh, no reflection yet. Does that help?
Thank you. It helps. And if you spend more cycles on it, it helps even more.
Yeah, I will try and find cycles, but I'm working 50% these days, so I don't know where those cycles are going to come from. Or I know where they're going to come from, I just don't know when.
All right, that sounds like good next steps. And of course, if anyone else wants to help out with the threat analysis here, let's do that.
Martin Duke, you're next in the queue.
Yeah, so I also intend to take a look at this. I think from an AV perspective, this is likely to be the biggest issue of contention in IESG review. The only thing I'll suggest at this point, I need the same analysis as Brian, but like a rule of thumb that's being used elsewhere in TCWG is the multiplier of 3 is about right. That is, if the attacker has to send X bytes, then you should not be able to force the rest of the network to generate no more than 3x bytes. I mean, they're using that in Quick and some other places. So, I mean, that might be one way to look at this problem and seeing how we're minimizing it. And, limiting it to one option maybe solves that problem. But that'll be one sort of rule of thumb that we can apply to sort of evaluate this.
Thank you. Tal, can we talk about direct export a bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've been trying to take notes during the actual.
Thank you for doing that.
Okay, so direct exporting, basically this draft has been around for a few months, and the idea is that rather than incorporating data fields into data packets, what we do is export the information, the data fields, to an external entity. Next, please. So the draft was adopted by the working group in December, and in February, we submitted the working group document version of this draft, and there were pretty minor changes like terminology changes, and a few references that weren't relevant were removed. Next, please. The major issue that we still need to tackle here is something that we discussed a few times, but we haven't reached a conclusion yet, which is the question whether the X option should include a specific hop count field or not. And if it doesn't include the hop count field, that would mean that we would be able to use the hop limit node ID data field, which is already defined in the data draft. And there are basically pros and cons for each of these approaches. And we can see these pros and cons here. Just very briefly, if there is no hop count, that means we use the existing functionality, so we don't need to define something new. And also it means that transit nodes do not need to update the DEX option. They just forward the packet without modifying the option. If we look at the explicit hop count, one advantage is that basically when you use the hop limit data field, you rely on copying the TTL or hop count from a lower layer. So if there's an explicit hop count field, you don't rely on a lower layer, which in some cases doesn't necessarily include a TTL field. Also, another advantage is that in some cases, it may be more accurate than using the TTL that is copied from the lower layer. In some cases, you may have some IOM-capable nodes that have been skipped for one reason or another, and you want to be able to detect that, and you can use that to detect these cases. So these are basically the pros and cons. We are looking for some more feedback from people in order for us to be able to resolve this and to decide which way to go.
I think Greg is up first for a question. Oh, did you want to take questions now or at the very end?
I think this is the last slide, so let's take questions now.
Yeah, this would be a good time for questions.
Hi, Tal, thanks for their updates and the presentation and stating their open questions. I just want to mention of another draft. It's a hybrid two-step, and I think that there might be some interesting, well, I don't like this word, but synergy between their approach of direct export and hybrid two-step. I think that both are complementary, and I wanted to use this opportunity to just mention and propose that we're working on this and discuss it on the list, of course, and in the design team.
Thanks. Martin, you are next.
Yes, I don't understand how loopback is not a special case of direct export where the export target happens to be the originator. And if that is correct, it would be great if we could converge on a single solution for this rather than have two separate approaches go to last call.
Well, I think basically we have heard this comment in the past, and I think the intention for these two flavors was a bit different. Loopback was intended to be returned to the origin, to the encapsulating node, in order to allow something like traceroute. And on the other hand, DEX is intended to be collected by a collector or a central entity. So the intention was a bit different, and one big advantage is that, or one big difference between these two approaches is that in the DEX case, we do not want transit nodes to modify the packet. And in the loopback case, we do want transit nodes to modify the packet because we do want to incorporate that information when it goes back to the encapsulating node.
Okay. Martin, did you have anything else you want to follow up, or should we move on to Brian?
Let's move on.
Before Brian.
So I'm actually going to follow up on Martin's comment. Thanks, Tal, for reiterating sort of the difference between these two things. I would phrase it a little bit more simply. In the direct export case, the target, like the place that the export is going to go, is actually a matter of configuration. So it's the control plane for each device. Whereas in the loopback case, the information about where it should go is taken out of the IP packet, right? It's the source address, the IP packet. That is an accurate statement, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So I think that makes this a little bit less scary in terms of sort of like amplification type things, in that, you know, you actually can be, which device you're going to throw all of the traffic at is a matter of configuration. It would be nice. Let me actually, I have it up in front of me. Yeah, okay, the security considerations of this document now, I think are good for handling that. And I like the fact that these two documents now have parallel security consideration. I'm going to put up a thing on my list of things to do, which again, low bandwidth these days, to follow up on this on the list. But I do like the fact that these are at least converging a bit in warnings about how they can be misused.
I think this discussion leads me to think that there's room for, even if they are separate options, long-term they should be defined kind of in a common place and essentially as variations on each other with lots of shared considerations.
I would say, not speaking from the chair, I very much agree with that statement.
Right. In the interest of time, I think we are going to move on. Of not working groups.
Did you need to get back in the queue for something important, or? Oh, sorry, you had removed.
I think Martin's muted. So yeah, let's move on for now. All right. So we have a couple of other documents we want to cover. We don't have a ton of time left, so if we could keep each of these to just around 5 minutes and just get through the first three if we can, that would be great. Rudiger, are you here?
Okay. Yep. The basic idea behind that was I've been working with segment routing and performance monitoring for a while. And the design aim of this draft IPPM connectivity monitoring was to use segment routing to have something like ping functionality, which means you scale with ping, one signal per interface to be monitored, but you take out a little more information. And I'm especially interested in locating congestion. So it took me a while to figure out how you could do something what should be called network tomography and set up paths which you control in the setup. Nothing is accidental here, and use not more than one measurement relation per monitored interface and have all the information like connectivity, locating congestion, and also being able to measure a round trip time per interface or path, and do all that in a controlled way. Right, this is the motivation. And then if you flip to the next slide, yeah, that's a bit difficult stuff. With segment routing, you can fix paths through a network. So here you see two things. One is what a single measurement path is looking like, and the second is how you'd overlay several measurement paths, and in the end, you can measure all the metrics or parameters which I mentioned on the first slide. So the above one shows that you start to measure from the path monitoring system, you pass the first router, then you make a kind of a U-turn, and then you do two other links. One you do downstream and the other upstream, and then back to the measurement system. That is a single measurement path. In the end, and that's described in the draft, you create an overlay which will create the pattern shown below with the three colors, and it has the properties shown per monitored path or interface. That is, you have one U-turn, you have one measurement going upstream through the interface and one measurement going downstream. And now you see that between LSRA and the LERI. The question might be, now what is missing on LERI? If you have another measurement path yellow, that would make a U-turn there. And if you then overlay all the measurement paths and evaluate them simultaneously, and that's the network tomography part, then you can figure out that if you have a packet loss on all three paths shown here, green, red, and blue simultaneously, you lost connectivity between LSRA and LRI. There's no other explanation for that. If you have a growing delay on red and blue, that can only be caused by congestion on the interface LSRA to LERI. And if you have simultaneous added delay on green and blue, that can only be LERI to LSRA. The expectation here is that there is a single event in the network only. The design is done for that. And well, I'm working with a carrier, so that's what usually happens. There's a single cause of error, there's no catastrophe. And that is what this draft is about, creating a metric which allows you to set up measurement paths in a controlled way as shown here. And well, if you do that on a larger scale, you likely have to automate it. But the automation is not part of this draft. It's only the metric. special setup of passes and the math you have to do to seize all the information. And that is it. If you like that, please comment on the list. I'd be interested, of course, of making this a workgroup document. I'm not sure whether we are chartered for segment routing.
Oh,
If we aren't, we should be.
All right, thank you so much. Again, to everyone, please do comment on the list. What do you think about this? I think we have time for one quick comment from Greg.
Okay, thank you. I think it's very interesting. The question I have is, how well synchronized are these reports on different spans, measurement paths you need to have? Because the correlating events, if they're persistent state, yes, that's probably easier. But if it's intermittent, that you need to have certain window of event synchronization.
Sure, that's true. I mean, that's a Nyquist, I think. If you want to detect something in a time frame of like 10 seconds, I say, or 10 milliseconds, you should have a packet distance of 5 milliseconds per measurement relation, and then you will be able to detect it for sure.
Okay, thank you.
With this, welcome. Okay.
All right.
There's no other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. How are you? Do you want to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I think you do have a number of slides, so if you want to.
Yeah, I have a quick. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So this postcard-based telemetry draft we have been submitted almost 2 years ago. But this is the first time we got a chance to present in this working group, and but it has been through a lot of discussions in the email list, and also it has some influence and impact on some ongoing works. Next slide, please. Yeah, what's new in this? I believe this is already version 05, and in this new version, we changed the status of the draft to informational. The main reason for that is that we think we will move all the normative specifications to some other directly related drafts. In this draft, we just position the two possible solutions of a PBT. We name that PBT-M and PBT-I, just as two high-level approaches of PBT. So for example, the PBT-I, I stands for instruction, will become an independent IOM option, direct export. And another one, we have another draft to show how it will be implemented in some other protocols, such as SRv6. Next slide, please. So on the high level, in this draft, we consider both this type, a group of techniques covered by this on-pass flow telemetry techniques. And there are two basic modes for that. First one is we call it passport mode. So the IOM trace mode is one representation for that mode. And another main branch is a postcard mode. And this postcard mode can be further partitioned to two subtypes. The first one is instruction-based. We call that PBT-I. The representative technique is IOM, direct export option. And another one, we call that PBT-M. M is marking-based PBT subtype. So for this type of another draft, we call that SRv6 PBT, is one representation for that. And also, there's another draft to support multicast telemetry, which basically can use the combination of the postcard mode and the instruction-based passport mode and the instruction-based PBT mode. So we can consider that as a hybrid mode. Next slide, please. So we'll go through the next three slides quickly. Basically, in this draft, we also summarize the pros and cons of each mode. For example, for this passport-based telemetry, it's good for data self-describing, and it has lower export overhead, and it's easy to configure. But it has some other issues, like since the header need to carry both the instruction and the data, it has some impact on performance, and also inflates the packet size, and cause some issues on the encapsulation in some protocols. And also there's some security concerns if you carry this sensitive measurement data along with the packet. And also if the data dropped on the forwarding path, you will lose everything. So there's some drawbacks. And next slide. For the postcard marking based, you don't need to encapsulate any new header in the packet. So it basically, the user packet remain the same, and you send the data using independent postcard packets to report to collected data. So it has basically it's address several issues of the passport mode, but it has introduced some new issues like the data correlation, and it increased data export overhead, and it also needs to configure all the nodes in the network, so the configuration overhead is also high. Next slide. And the postcard-based, so this instruction-based postcard mode kindly is it's mix of the it's a provide some trade-offs and makes address some of the issues, and but it also has some drawbacks remains, like the export overhead is still kind of high. It also reintroduced the encapsulation issues, but on the other hand, it's also good on the other aspects. So why we have this document, and in this document we describe the high-level approaches and makes a good classification on this high-level path telemetry technique. And we summarize the pros and the cons of each approach. And we also detail the marking-based BBT mode, which is not covered anywhere else. So we can see so far this work has motivated several other works. And but the detailed implementation or standardization of each approach will be covered by separate documents. Next slide. Yeah, so based on the current maturity of this draft, we request the working group adoption for it. I think that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I do want to thank you for all the work that you've done with the design team to incorporate your ideas into the direct export. Regarding this document, I think my impression and the impression of speaking for all the chairs is we want to really converge on documents, not have too many different approaches, and we're happy with how we see a convergence going towards direct export for that.
Yes.
I don't personally see a great need to have an independent informational document that describes some of the background. We do have this, I mean, you always will have a draft here as a reference for that. Publishing this as an informational RFC that is separate from direct export or anything else, I'm not convinced of the value of. I would love to see if there are bits of explanation for rationale that we want to add into direct export as background sections, appendices. I think that does make sense. Of course, if we have the marking mode, having that be a separate document also makes sense. But I guess what I would like to hear is if anyone in the group, besides the authors, feel very strongly that this should be an independent document that the group should adopt, please chime in now or send something to the list on that.
So in this slide, list several the rationale for why we have this document. And especially for the third point, actually, in this document, it describes a marking-based PPT. It's actually not covered anywhere else. So, and we consider that that's an important approach.
Yes, and so I think having a specific document that is non-informational that talks about how you do the marking as something more of a protocol level thing makes sense. I'm seeing several +1s on the Jabber as well as on the chat in WebEx. So I think for now, what I'm going to ask the authors of this is to work on incorporating any informational bits that you have into the direct export effort. But I think we are not going to plan on adopting this currently. And yeah, so please let's try to fold things together.
So I also,
yeah,
I'm also wondering if there's actually a need to actually summarize the high-level approaches. Is that valuable, or sometimes we do need to understand the pros and cons of each approach.
Large architecture.
There's nowhere to find it. Yeah.
I think in this case, we can add that high-level description into the direct export document. All right, but thank you for that. I think we are all out of time at this point. Just as a reminder, if you did not sign the blue sheet, please go into the Etherpad that is linked on the slides. Thank you all for doing this and having this virtual experience. Sorry if you had any technical glitches, and we hope to see you virtually or in person next time and on the lists. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.